Yellow fever was a constant blight for Eastern American cities, especially the southeastern cities in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Most outbreaks occurred in the summer months, but some summers would pass without any incident. Severe outbreaks occurred mostly in the south, especially along the Gulf Coast. In the summer of 1693, a strange disease spread through Boston. Victims suffered from jaundice, high fever, and black vomit. For more than 200 years, yellow fever, as the disease became known, attacked numerous American cities, usually in severe summer outbreaks. More on the history of yellow fever in America later. But what is certain is that in a massive SHTF, a massive fall of society, yellow fever will return to the United States of America. But we have stocks of vaccine, right?
Yellow fever vaccine is a very effective and safe vaccine. With one dose, we can protect people for life. And to control an outbreak, with 90% of the population vaccinated, is enough to control the outbreak. We need a stockpile of yellow fever vaccine to be ready to ship vaccine immediately when we have an outbreak. It's very difficult to forecast outbreaks, so the only way to be ready and to respond immediately with a mass vaccination campaign is to have in stock 6 million doses every year.
6 million doses? Southeastern United States has a current population of 97 million people. Florida alone has 22 million people. Most of that population have never experienced yellow fever, so have no immunity, and most of them have never been vaccinated for yellow fever. Obviously, in a massive SHTF, the ability to make more vaccine, ship the vaccine, store the vaccine, and give the vaccine in a timely way is probably not going to happen.
This current stockpile maintained at the level of 6 million doses is managed by an international coordinating group called ICG, which is composed by 4 agencies, WHO, UNICEF, Red Cross Federation, and Médecins Sans Frontières.
So potentially within a few years of SHTF, you're going to have 97 million, or the surviving population of the southeastern United States, completely at risk from catching yellow fever. If we assume that 97 million don't die at all, but society has fallen, that is 9.7 million people who will die.
The main objective of having a stockpile of vaccine is to control an urban outbreak, because the disease spreads rapidly when we have the vector, which is the mosquitoes, and very dense populations.
There is no known cure for yellow fever, so either have the vaccine before you catch it, or have had it before and survived.
This year with Angola outbreak is the first time that we have depleted the stockpile. So in the ICG has 6 million, that has been enough since 2001, but this time we have depleted twice the stockpile. We have used 30 million doses of vaccine. This time that the stockpile has been depleted twice, we immediately start working with the manufacturer to replenish the stockpile as soon as possible. And also we work with UNICEF Supply Division to prioritize the shipments to make sure that the vaccine is prioritized to the stockpile.
If you're bitten, you have a 5 to 10% chance of death. Your initial symptoms after 3 to 6 days after exposure are awful. Then everybody pretty much recovers fully. But for about 10 to 20% of people, after about a few hours or a few days, they get it bad. And out of them, 50% at least will die. It's the number of healthy people going into the toxic phase of yellow fever that's really terrifying. Plus it seems very random. For the people in the toxic phase, if you do recover, if you're one of the 50% that do recover, you're probably going to be very weak and ill for months afterwards. Without modern healthcare, the chance of 50% of people surviving the toxic phase is probably a lot lower. Could yellow fever return to the United States? It's a certainty that it would in SHTF. If spraying, vaccination, drainage controls all fail, then the mosquitoes will return. Some of those mosquitoes will bite people with yellow fever and move a little bit north, and then a little bit north, and then a little bit north. The Aedes aegypti mosquito is going to range further north than it did in the 19th and 18th centuries because of human-caused climate change. Outbreaks of yellow fever killed 5 to 10% of Americans on a regular basis in the early part of the 18th century and some areas in the United States in the 19th century. Obviously, people that had survived the previous outbreaks were much less likely to die from it because they were immune. As Doctors Fauci and Paulus point out quite remarkably accurately, we all need to know about yellow fever if we're planning for grid down, especially if you live in the southeastern United States of America, and of course Mexico. It was 1793 in Philadelphia and the summer was proving to be one of the hottest on record. A blanket of humidity covered the city, fed by putrid swamps that served as breeding grounds for the Aedes aegypti mosquito. While smaller outbreaks of yellow fever had occurred in the US since 1693, this year would prove different. The capital city would be decimated. In just a matter of months, 10% of Philadelphia's population was dead, and a greater proportion had fled the city in fear of their lives. The Philadelphia outbreak in 1793 was a huge wake-up call. It was an absolutely catastrophic event for Philadelphia. But more than the figures, more than the 10% who died and the massive relocation, is the absolute poverty and tragedy that such an epidemic provides. The ongoingness from this is that a large number of people who were otherwise fit and well, productive members of Philadelphian society, were no longer there. They were dead. The virus first arrived in North America during the 1600s with the Atlantic slave trade, when infected female Aedes aegypti mosquitoes laid eggs in stagnant water and in cotton bales on ships, and bit and infected slaves. But it didn't reach the Gulf Coast until the 1830s, after native mosquitoes transmitted the spreading disease from infected hosts to non-carriers. In the summer of 1839, 2 years after being named the capital of the Republic of Texas, Houston saw its first outbreak of yellow jack. The first few people connected the disease's transmission to mosquito bites, and physicians instructed Houstonians to try a number of useless methods to stop the virus's spread. The air filled with acrid smoke from the burning of tar and sulphur, on doctors' orders and in misguided efforts to clear the bad air thought to be the culprit, but people continued to fall sick. The sick went into quarantine. People shot off cannons, hoping to clear the infection out by force. I wonder in 2023 if people would fire handguns into the air to ward off yellow fever. The quarantine Houston did initially didn't work because it wasn't a tight enough quarantine. People were still able to move through the quarantine barriers and infect other people via infecting mosquitoes that were in the area. Once yellow fever is in the population of mosquitoes, it stays there. The only reason it's gone from the United States of America is because of fumigation. Many people acted extremely bravely in the face of this terrible disease. One Galveston doctor, Ashbel Smith, even swallowed the vomit of the infected patients to find out what would happen. He didn't get sick. The dead piled up so fast they were buried in long trenches and without any ceremony. A twelfth of Houston's population died before the cooler months provided a reprieve. The epidemic returned in the summer of 1843 and again over the following decades, with outbreaks in New Orleans, usually triggering more on the Texas coast and then creeping inland. The worst came in 1867 as Houston, then a city of about 6,000 people, was becoming the military hub of the state thanks to the growing influx of federal troops stationed there during Reconstruction. That summer, 492 Houstonians died of yellow fever. Even Sam Houston's widow was buried hastily just outside the city. However, when Yellow Jack returned to Galveston in 1870, Houstonians were savvy. The city employed a strict armed quarantine which kept the infected islanders from coming into the town. Sure enough, the scourge didn't penetrate the cities it had in years past, and from then on quarantines were put in place whenever Yellow Jack showed up on the coast, helping to curb the spread. What is the SHTF risk? Well, in an ongoing SHTF, insect spraying won't be happening, so mosquitoes are going to rebound, really rebound. Drainage won't happen. There'll be standing water everywhere because nobody's going to be driving around in trucks to fix these issues. Sewage is going to overflow and it's going to become stagnant water. People are going to dig holes all over the spot to put their poop in, and that again will attract water and attract mosquitoes. But crucially, people are going to spend a lot more time outdoors in forested areas exposed to mosquitoes in SHTF than they currently do right now. As yellow fever starts to make its way north again, there will be frequent outbreaks, some minor, some major, but they will come and they will come and they will come. The first few outbreaks will kill 5 to 10% of the entire population, who have probably spent the last 3 or 4 years trying not to die and trying to recover from the catastrophic SHTF. This could be a mortal blow to many population centres in southeastern United States. Prevention, well, don't get bitten by a mosquito, but vaccination has to be done 30 days before you're actually infected. It can be done closer than that, but ideally it would be 30 days before to give you the 99% protection. A sudden massive outbreak of yellow fever is going to overwhelm our stockpiles, even with making more vaccines as fast as we can, and distributing them is going to be difficult because nobody's going to want to go into the yellow fever areas. It's going to be a trying time. Even now, even in 2023, if we have a massive epidemic of yellow fever in the United States, it's going to really tax the population down there. So I wouldn't normally recommend vaccination for a possible disease in SHTF, but I think for yellow fever, if you live in an area where it was endemic and lots of people died in the 18th and 19th century, and you think SHTF is likely, you might want to go to the doctor and tell him you want to travel to one of those funny countries that have a lot of yellow fever, pay the money, which isn't a huge amount for this, and have a vaccine. This means in grid down, you won't have to worry about yellow fever killing you and yours, but you'll have to deal with everybody else dropping down sick. Let's assume you've never had yellow fever and you haven't been vaccinated, and a huge catastrophic SHTF has happened and you haven't died, and a few years have gone by and you haven't died. You're an exceptionally lucky person to be this far into the event. So what can you actually do in SHTF? Well, the principal thing you'll be able to do is vector control. You want to remove standing water anywhere near your property. You want to use anti-larval stuff if you can. You probably won't have any. You want to use mosquito netting all across your house. You'll be wanting to limit your exposure in mid-May through August, September to mosquitoes. You'll be wanting to limit your exposure to mosquitoes, so you don't want to be out at dawn and you don't want to be out at dusk, and you want to wear clothing that actually stops mosquitoes from biting you. You might think you're going to use spray. Well, you can use spray, but it'll run out. Now, the problem with spray is it doesn't stop 100% of them biting you. It just takes one mosquito to bite you with yellow fever and you have it. So treatment's fairly straightforward. Bed rest, and I will probably do a video on how to actually look after people who require bed rest, because it's actually a skill. It's not as easy as you think it is. You want to use hydration. You want to be very careful doing that. If they can't drink, if you start sticking metal needles into them, you're going to cause bleeding points. You might want to think about using a rectal hydration method, but again, lots of lube, and be very careful. And if they have hemorrhoids, don't do it. You really don't want them to bleed. Once they start bleeding, they bleed to death. It's a bit controversial, but as far as I'm concerned, don't ever give them Tylenol, paracetamol. It's liver toxic, and the liver is going to be taking a huge hit from yellow fever. So no Tylenol. You don't want to give them aspirin either, because aspirin encourages bleeding, and bleeding is one of the major things you want to try and avoid in a yellow fever patient, so they don't get aspirin. The clotting effect is also why you can't actually give Advil, ibuprofen. You can't give the big three. What you can do if you have it is give pure codeine, 15 to 30 milligrams by mouth, about every 6 hours. Beware of the fact this will cause extreme constipation, and hard feces can cause bleeding from the rectum. Again, be very cautious in making your patient bleed. Now, you want a mosquito net around them 24/7 until they have no more symptoms. This is to actually stop the mosquitoes biting them and then transferring to somebody else and biting them. So it's to actually break the chain of infection. As it is, the person themselves, touching them, handling their vomit, feces and blood, has other risks, but the risk of catching yellow fever from them is zero. Now, use very cautious handling. Just turning people like this can actually cause bruising and hemorrhage under the skin. Treat them like they're very fine china. The treatments tried in Philadelphia in 1793 didn't work, and they won't work in SHTF, and yet I can guarantee, give a few years, people will start to use stuff like this again and hope it works. It's critical we don't lose the ability to understand science and biology just because we've almost wiped our species out. It's a long road back from that level of ignorance, and it causes huge suffering. Try to remember science and use it. One of the things that doesn't cover very well, and you might want to cover this yourself, is actually to give Gravol orally or by suppository. Again, if you're giving it by suppository, be very careful you don't cause them to bleed. So dimenhydrate 50 milligrams about every 8 hours. They will need this. They will be extremely nauseated. A little word on mosquito nets. They're absolutely an essential prep for most of us who are going to experience airborne disease from flies. Absolutely critical to have lots of functional mosquito nets in the here and now. It's also a great idea to know how they work. For yellow fever specifically, the Aedephus aegypti mosquito is most active, the female, during the day. They're not really probably going to bite you at night, though I would still recommend you wear a mosquito net over your bed at night. But the major risk is during the day from these mosquitoes. That's the major risk for you. Most people who catch this disease happen to be young men working in lumber industries in parts of the world where yellow fever is endemic. In large parts of the United States of America, after grid down, yellow fever will be endemic. So in conclusion, yellow fever remains a severe, real, high-risk probability event in the event of society falling in most of the southeastern United States. A hard winter will eradicate it, but the mosquito eggs will survive. And the yellow fever virus will live inside of those eggs and then come back. It will come in waves, you have to be very cautious. Strict absolute quarantine. Don't let anybody in or out of your area if there's a yellow fever outbreak. Be proactive if you live in the yellow fever country. At least get multiple amounts of mosquito nets. Hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry about the audio at the beginning. I was trying to use a little microphone device. I don't think it worked very well. If you actually preferred the audio at the beginning to this, let me know in the comments. Toodles.
This has been a Tiny Terrier production. Wolfie wishes you all well.